Yo, sorry, man.
No, I'm good. You all right?
Yeah, I just banged my knee into my desk because I'm a big old idiot.
Well, you know what? Alhamdulillah that you survived. That everything's okay.
Yeah, the way that Khabib says that is like one of my favorite things about him, and I have many favorite things about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least we do have, after this UFC event, concrete evidence that Khabib Nurmagomedov's new child was conceived in Cowgirl. Because if Khabib had been on top on that fateful night, Lord knows the boy would not have made it to term. There's no way. He's too deadly.
True. My God. My God, man, that is. Oof. I don't even know what to say.
I mean, yeah. What the fuck else? Who else is there, man? Like there's nobody in the division who can, both move and like counter wrestle as well as Barboza while keeping his striking volume up. Like,
I think the only person who could beat him is McGregor, and that's because I think McGregor could hit him hard enough on the counter to put him down with one or two shots. But I think that's all you're going to get.
It's like you could run 1,000 simulations of Khabib and McGregor's first exchange and have a very good idea of how the fight was going to go. Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and it is a new year. We've got a fresh, new outlook, Pat, and fortunately, that outlook does not include any more picking against Khabib Nurmagomedov. But I'm happy to say we both entered the new year having picked Cyborg, and so all of our predictions for UFC 219 were not misled. Cyborg defeated Holm, of course, in the main event, and we are going to talk about that. We are also going to dip our toes into the co-main event battle between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Edson Barboza. Once again, I suspected that somebody might have the striking chops to take advantage of Khabib's weak points, and once again, it did not matter. And then we're going to get into Cynthia Calvillo's fight with Carla Esparza, in which she was upset by the former and inaugural UFC strawweight champion, and then Carlos Condit versus Neil Magny, and Matthews Nicolaou's win over Louis Smolka after that. Let's start with the main event, though, Pat. Cyborg versus Holm. First question for you. How did two judges give Holly Holm 2 of those 5 rounds?
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
There's no other explanation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could see giving her maybe 1 round.
Sure.
I could see that. But at some point, you've got to pay attention to what strikes are actually landing in a fight and not the appearance of activity. And I think this comes back to something that we've talked about a number of times over the last couple of years, which is that I don't think judges see counters.
That MMA judges are really bad at seeing counter punches landing.
So and I think to some extent this is a natural thing where your eye is drawn to the first flurry of activity and your eyes tend to stay on that.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think they need to retrain judges in how to watch a fight, because you cannot let your attention be drawn to one fighter. The way that I do it is in striking exchanges, I pick a spot between the two fighters, watch that spot, and let my peripheral vision pick things up.
I try to do like they say on The Wire. I try to have soft eyes, Bunk. Mm-hmm. I try to take in the whole exchange by not really focusing on anything in particular.
Exactly. And so, but I think for whatever reason, MMA judges are really, really, really drawn to that first burst of movement.
Yeah. And
tend to focus on that and forget what comes after it. So
honestly, I hope it's that and not the other thing I suspect, because I have seen quite a shocking number of comments in which people either said outright or implied that Holly Holm's many clinches won her some of the rounds. And I hope to God that the judges were just misreading the striking exchanges and not giving Holly Holm tons of points for like 45 seconds at a time of controlling Cyborg against the fence, because it was I appreciate the tactic.
Up in the clinch.
Yeah, and I appreciate the tactic, but it wasn't winning or anything. Yeah, she got outstruck in the clinch. She was clearly using it to neutralize, and it worked effectively in that she could stymie some of Cyborg's pressure and tie her up for a bit. But as soon as she gets double underhooks and does nothing with it for 30 seconds straight, what am I scoring here? You know,
she landed one strike in the clinch the whole fight. It was that one elbow. I'm dead serious. Look at the fight metric. She landed one strike. It was that one elbow in, I think, the second round.
That can't be. Just one. Surely she had some knees, right?
Nope.
Oh my God.
Holly Holm clinch, one of two.
That is absurd. Oh, but they did win her the rounds. Okay,
yeah, so like look at the statistics do not always tell the whole story, but in rounds 1 and 2 of that fight, they do tell the whole story, which is that Cyborg outlanded Holm 3-1 in the first round. She outlanded her 5-1 in the second round. She outlanded her almost 4-1 in round 3, 2-1 in round 4, and almost 2-1 in round 5, the most active round.
Yeah, and not to mention in all but the 5th round, she landed by far the only really decisively powerful punches.
That was a clean sweep of a fight. It was closer to being 50-44 than it was 48-47.
Yes, I agree. I think Cyborg won every single round. I thought Holly Holm made a good account of herself. Having said all of that, I really think she did. She did a lot better than I expected her to, and I feel, having watched it, that I should have expected it more, because it seems that no matter what the level of competition, if you give Holly Holm a fighter who is willing to come after her, who is stuck to that idea either as a tenet of their game plan or they just get drawn into it easily over and over, she is going to find some openings. And that was, I think, the case throughout most of her boxing career, is that Holly Holm fought the vast majority of her opponents. If you go back and watch a random selection of her fights, whatever you can find online, there typically are women who are coming after her, which allows Holly to do what she does well. And that's why she looks so awkward against MMA fighters, I think, some of the time, is that unlike boxers, most of them aren't even confident enough in their striking to come after Holly Holm. And then the ones who are have now figured out, like Cyborg, like Valentina Shevchenko, that they don't really have to lead all that much when they come forward, and that cuts down on her effectiveness too. But she definitely got some shots in, and I thought she approached this fight as intelligently as she could. I was impressed with how strong she looked in the clinch, despite the fact she was being outstruck. I think she did physically match Cyborg in some ways there, and I don't know, acquitted herself well. And I expected her to get destroyed, and she got slightly less than completely destroyed. So credit to her for that. And I'm not joking, despite what it may sound like. I'm serious. She did pretty well.
Yeah, they had exactly the right game plan, which was to let Cyborg come in, let her overcommit range-wise, hit her and get out, or alternatively to step inside, grab double underhooks, and hold her for long enough to hopefully wear her down, or at least create an opportunity to get away. That was the game plan. Mm-hmm. It was exactly the correct game plan. I think that I'm trying to think of things that she could have done differently, and I think from a planning perspective, there was nothing. She could have adjusted better in the fight, but Holly Holm is not really much of an adjuster, I don't think.
No, she's not.
And she's pretty rote, and she tends to fight to the game plan that she has, which is not a bad thing at all. It's the kind of fighter that she is. Frankie Edgar is also a game plan mm-hmm. guy, though he probably adjusts better over the long run than Holm does. Like, you can be a game plan fighter who's not a great adjuster and still be great.
Holly, like her teammate Carlos Condit, her adjustments often come in the form of like upping the amount that you're throwing. Of mm-hmm. just letting the weird long combinations go more frequently as the fight goes on, but it's not really an adjustment per se.
Yeah, not in the same way that she's got like active eyes reading her opponent, and that's not quite the same thing. Which is what Cyborg did in this fight. Cyborg figured out what the game plan was pretty early. Jason Perillo gave her good advice, and even the clinches didn't throw her off for very long. I think she was surprised at the very beginning by how strong Holm was mm-hmm. when she had those double underhooks, which, you're right, probably shouldn't have surprised us as much as it did, because that's what we saw against Germaine Durand to me too. We saw that against Ronda Rousey, is that if you give Holm an underhook, much less double underhooks, she is extremely strong.
Mm-hmm.
She has a great understanding of that position, like with how she places her hips, how she leans into her opponent, how she uses head pressure. That she is not a great clinch fighter, but she has a fantastic understanding of that one position, and she used it really well here. I heard some people say that maybe this means Cyborg's dominance in the clinch is entirely dependent upon her size and her physicality. No, if you give a physically strong fighter double underhooks, she's going to be able to control that position for at least a little while.
Well, what happened as the fight went on? As a counter to that point, Cyborg stopped giving her the double underhooks every time, and each and every clinch exchange became more and more perilous for Holly Holm as the rounds went by. Holm started to eat savage knees to the body when she got into those clinches, and then when she did manage to secure double underhooks after about the first 2 rounds, Cyborg kind of just relaxed. She was like, all right, well, she's not doing anything to me here, and I'm in a mechanically disadvantageous position, so I'm just going to, kind of chill, maybe weigh down with my armpits on her arms a little bit, and then when she seems to be wearing out or relaxing herself, I'll push her face away and escape. And she just did it over and over. I don't know. It didn't look like she was...
A couple of times she did the Fabricio Verdum against Cain Velasquez thing where she relaxed against the fence, and then grabbed a collar tie or a double collar tie and used the pressure from her elbows to create separation. She especially did that in the 5th round with really vicious results. She landed some just devastating knees in that round. So, I mean, how do we read this performance? What do we take away from this? What does this tell us about Cyborg? What does it tell us about Holm?
Yeah, I do want to talk about Cyborg's half of this performance because even though she did dominate, and even though we have to give credit to Holly Holm for doing so well, I'm not 100% satisfied with what I saw from Cyborg. Like I didn't see everything I expected to see. I don't know if you feel the same way. There were a few things that were a little disappointing to me. Like, for example, it took Cyborg, after trying it for the first minute of the first round before giving up on it, it took her about 3 rounds after that point to start countering with her jab. And I think Cyborg's jab is one of her best weapons. It was certainly the thing that allowed her to so effortlessly control Tanya Evinger in her last fight, and it worked brilliantly in the 4th and 5th rounds of this fight. When Holly Holm would step in, Cyborg would just stick the left hand out, and Holly would run into it, and then her face would explode because Cyborg's jab is like a fucking cannon. It's a very, very effective and very stiff left hand. And I thought, too, that she was a little iffy on some of those counters. I don't know if she found Holm to be a little awkward, perhaps, in the way she attacked, and so it took her a while to get her timing, but she was a little like Ioane and Jacek against Rose Namajunas, with sort of these, not quite desperate, but a little looser than I expected counter combinations in the first portion of the fight. Cyborg definitely got more comfortable, I thought, and adjusted to what was in front of her, but it did seem like Holly might have thrown her off a bit, or she was a little rusty. I don't know. Did you see the same thing?
I did not see quite the same thing. I was a little underwhelmed by her in the first round or two, but I think there are 2 components to that. First of all, I think she came in with a healthy amount of respect for Holm. I think maybe she had too much respect for Holm early on. I think she was pretty tentative when she was pressuring her. Sorry, hold on 1 second, man. Let me take this. Lucy is just...
She's going to have to be executed. Oh, what a way to start the new year, listeners? Pat's strangling his dog right now, just 6 feet away from the microphone. So near, and yet so far away. As the life leaves Lucy's eyes.
Sorry, dude.
Oh, sorry.
She was, were you still talking?
Yeah, I was just describing you killing your dog.
Not killing her, but very angry. Okay, sorry. Can we take that back? Where were we?
Yeah, you're fine. You were saying that you were a little disappointed in the first 2 rounds. You think she had too much respect for Holly Holm? Yeah,
I think she had a little too much respect for Holm early on, where I think she was clearly worried about running onto the left hand.
Yeah.
And as a result, she got caught by the right hook a couple of times as Holm exited, which I thought was really smart. I think Jackson Wink knew that Cyborg would be keying on the left hand and snuck that right hook in a number of times. That's not Holm's best punch. It's not even a punch she throws very often.
Yeah.
She basically only throws it pressuring opponents as she exits as kind of a check hook. And I think they did a good job of catching her with that early.
Same shot worked really well against Ronda Rousey too. Landed hard a few times early over Ronda's jab, and I think maybe that's what took Cyborg's jab away from her. I don't think maybe it should have had such a profound effect on the way she was fighting, but maybe that plays into what you're saying, that she respected Holm a little more than she really needed to.
Well, and I think there's something to be said for the fact that this was by far the biggest spot of Cyborg's career.
Yeah.
She's been in a lot of fights over the years. This is her first time as a pay-per-view headliner. She's fighting a former bantamweight champion known for having pulled off one of the biggest upsets of all time. There's a little to be said for kind of feeling the moment. It's not like she lost those rounds against, again, somebody who is by any metric an absolutely elite fighter at 135 or 145 pounds. I don't hold it against her for taking a couple of rounds to get unspooled, especially when, again, at least to those of us who were watching with open, clear eyes, like she still won those rounds clearly and cleanly. Yeah,
very clearly.
So I think I will say this. Cyborg is not physically, I think, the fighter she was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. She's much sharper technically, but she's not quite as fast as she used to be. And I think her triggers are maybe a little slower.
Oh, no. Jason Perillo, first Michael Bisping. Now Cyborg, he only gets to really get the best out of his fighters post-prime, it seems.
Well, I think that Perillo, frankly, appeals to fighters who are kind of post-prime because he's such a strong technician.
Sure. RDA probably counts for that list as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fighters go to Perillo, I think, at this stage in their careers, also because I think it's not cheap to work with him. Like, you need to be in the greater LA area, which is an extremely expensive place to be and not easy to be for fighters. Like, the cost of living here is so high. The reason there's no major camp here is, I think, because there's nowhere that fighters can afford to live on what the UFC pays.
Sure, that makes sense.
It's very difficult. Like, that's why these guys are all down in Huntington Beach, which is one of the cheaper parts of Southern California. Like, there's no camp in Santa Monica, you know what I mean? Like, Dynamics is there, but like, it's not a big fight camp. But yeah. So at any rate, I think she may be slowing down just a tad, which is to be expected. It's not making her any less effective as a fighter, but I think maybe she's just a touch slower than she was in her physically overwhelming prime.
Yeah, I think that could be possible. It didn't really stand out to me. Like, I would like to rewatch the fight with that in mind to see if she looked a little slow. I think I spent a lot of time watching this fight. I don't know, wondering why. What was it in particular that made Holm such a difficult that allowed Holm to give Cyborg so much difficulty in adjusting that I think that we don't typically see out of Cyborg. Like, for example, we mentioned Jason Perillo. He asked for the straight right hand instead of the overhand or the wide right a lot of times, and Cyborg threw very few of them. And I have not found that typically to be the case with her. I have actually found her to typically be a fairly coachable fighter, one who adjusts fairly well and listens to instructions from one round to the next. And again, maybe it's feeling the moment, maybe it's past prime, maybe it's a combination of lots of things, maybe it's just the awkwardness and skill of Holly Holm. But it did, I don't know, Cyborg took a little while to key in on things that I would have expected her to be more keyed in on.
I think Holm's timing is really awkward, and I think it bears remembering that like we find flaws in Holm's game, but the metric against which we judge Holm is an extremely high one.
Sure.
Like, we hold her to high standards because of what she's accomplished and because of the reputation that she has. By any reasonable standard, she is a tricky striker to figure out. The fact that we have seen her get figured out is not so much a knock on Holm as it is a testament to the fact that she's fought some really good strikers. She fought Valentina Shevchenko, who's maybe the most technically sound striker in all of women's MMA. She's fought Germaine de Randamie, who has an incredible amount of like very good kickboxing and Muay Thai experience. Like, she's not a novice. And now she's fought Cyborg, who has spent the better part of the last 12 years working under some of the very best and most experienced striking coaches in MMA. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
So I think the fact that we have seen Holm get figured out, like you've seen what Holm does to novice strikers. Like, she knocked Ronda Rousey's head clean off.
Yeah.
Betch Correia is not a bad technical striker, and Holm knocked her head clean off. Like, that's Holm is tricky and difficult to figure out, and the fact that it took a little time for Cyborg to figure out, it also took Shevchenko a little while to figure her out. It took Germaine Durandamy kind of had a beat on her from the beginning, but but even she really only hit her stride about halfway through the second round of that fight when she started landing those clean right hands. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe as far as the straight right thing is concerned, I think she felt like the range was never right for it. And that to me is a testament to Holm more than anything else, that Holm did a really good job of collapsing the range.
Yeah, it's true.
And not give it, like, you can't throw a straight right if you're too close for the straight right or too far out for the straight right.
Yeah, this seemed like maybe it's just because she had Cyborg on the fringes of range, but this was maybe one of the better range performances of Holly Holm's UFC career. She seemed to have a very good read on what distances she could use. I mean, once again, the stepping into the clinch on your own terms, which she did so brilliantly in just one brief moment against Ronda Rousey, was a big part of this one, but also keeping Cyborg on the end of her shots, landing a punch and then following it into the pocket, or into the phone booth, so that Cyborg could not counter her with the longer, straighter shots. She did a really nice job of controlling the distance. And so maybe I should be a little more forgiving on Cyborg as well for still winning every single round, despite the fact that the Holm was, she was keeping her thinking throughout the bout.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty brilliant tactical and strategic performance from Cyborg, all things considered, against by far the best opponent of Cyborg's career. Like somebody with the right game plan, with a skill set to trouble her, who wasn't going to go away as the fight went on. Like, as much as anything else, this was a testament to Holm's durability.
Oh, and, absolutely.
Like, we've never seen anybody take those shots from Cyborg and keep going. So I thought Cyborg did a good job of not getting too excited, knowing when she could afford to explode, when she had energy to burn. She maintained a pretty steady pace the whole fight. She only really let it go in the fifth round when she knew there was nothing after that. Like,
yeah, if Cyborg was shaken or if she was feeling the moment a little too much, she certainly hit it well. Despite how that may have manifested itself in her tactics and the way she approached the fight, she looked very composed. And anybody out there who was expecting, as I definitely wasn't, anybody out there who was expecting Holly Holm to have a massive stamina advantage and to be able to wear Cyborg down by the fifth round, I hope has had their mind on that thing, that factor thoroughly changed. Like, that's not easy to do against Cyborg. She's got a pretty good quality of fitness, in case you can't tell by looking at her. She does 50 miles of road work every week. Yeah, she's not like some bruiser who just wastes her energy. Like, she has the discipline, she has the experience, she has the conditioning.
Yeah, I would say my takeaway from this is that the question I kind of had going into the fight, and I was pretty sure I knew the answer, was whether Cyborg is a big fish in the smallest possible pond, or whether she's an objectively elite talent who just happened to have been fighting in a division with all the depth of a mud puddle, Yeah. And I think the answer is that she's an objectively elite talent. If you can do this to Holly Holm and beat her up clearly over 5 rounds, win every round on our scorecards, outland her. What was the final tally here? Outland her
118 to 44.
Yeah, outland her almost 3-1 over the course of the fight. Get hit with only 19% of the shots thrown at you.
Yeah.
Which even by Holm standards, like, Holm is not an especially accurate striker.
While landing 52% of your own significant strikes according to Fight Metric. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. That is a hell of a performance.
Yeah.
I think. And I don't know where this goes from here. I don't know if Megan Anderson is the one to beat Cyborg. My thought is probably not. But I think it's worth treating this for a moment as kind of the capping moment. And like, the Cyborg proved it. She went out and she proved it.
Oh, for sure.
The only thing she could have done better is if she'd flattened Holm, which both you and I thought she would do. But I think we severely underestimated Holm's durability. So credit to Cyborg
and her craft to not have to rely on her durability quite as much as like Tanya Evinger did. She wasn't just taking punches over and over and over again. One thing I did want to mention, something that we may be talking about in the future, because this is the era of the super fight now, Pat. Megan Anderson, of course, is the one everyone's expecting, but recently, if I recall, Amanda Nunes said she'd be interested in fighting Cyborg.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have interest in watching that fight? Because I know I sure would.
I would absolutely be interested in watching that fight.
Those are two kind of like stylistically quite similar fighters. Like I think that would be a really interesting match between two very dangerous Muay Thai style strikers.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would probably pick Cyborg, but I would be very interested to watch that. I think it would be slower in pace than people might be expecting. I don't think it would turn into a firefight, at least not right away.
I think both would have a lot of respect for one another.
Yeah, I think it would be like slow through like 11 minutes, and then you would just get an insane burst of violence in the third round that would decide things.
It sounds like my favorite kind of fight. I love the tactical war. You know, I love the chess match with very high stakes. So I think it could be one of those. And I don't know. I just wanted to bring it up because the idea of Nunes versus Cyborg is very tantalizing to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. It's not like there's a huge raft of contenders at 135 pounds that we're waiting on here.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have two divisions held up by two champions fighting, like these are the two to hold up, in my opinion. Nobody's really waiting in the wings at the moment. So. Okay, I think that does it for our first segment. When we come back, we are going to get into the rest of this main card. Specifically, we're going to kick things off with Khabib Nurmagomedov's dominant victory over Edson Barboza after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands, where we are kicking off the new year right, eating a big bowl here. Pat, I don't know about you, Pat, eating a big bowl of black-eyed peas and collard greens. I suspect with your Irish heritage, you are enjoying some ditty bread, a traditional Irish New Year's meal over there. And we are ready to talk about, speaking of ditty bread, the man who will not be helping Conor McGregor earn any in the near future, at least if Conor McGregor is to be believed. Khabib Nurmagomedov once again asserts himself as probably the guy to challenge Conor McGregor in this division, the most tantalizing threat to McGregor's yet undefended lightweight strap. He took on Edson Barboza in the co-main event at UFC 219. He destroyed him. He utterly, utterly destroyed him. I was, once again, incredibly impressed. And as I said at the top of the show, I'm pretty much done picking against Khabib Nurmagomedov against anybody. Who can stop that relentless wrestling attack, honestly?
Nobody. I don't think.
Right? Like I'm starting to think if we're looking for somebody to do it, it's going to be more like a Kevin Lee, like somebody who's actually a strong enough wrestler to do that. Like you just cannot beat Khabib Nurmagomedov by hoping not to have to wrestle with him. It's just not an option.
Yeah, I do not think at this point. I think Kevin Lee would be an interesting fight, probably, but I don't think there's anybody in that division who can stop him.
Doesn't feel like it.
Especially now that we've seen him apparently morph into like 2010 vintage Cain Velasquez with his striking on the feet.
I'm so glad you said that.
Like that was my big question here, because I really thought that if Khabib just kind of dove forward on takedown attempt after takedown attempt, no matter how relentless his pressure footwork was, Barboza was just going to land on him over and over and over again. What I did not expect was Khabib to be a constant threat on the feet as well. So and to push the pace that he did on the feet too. Yeah. It's not just that he was throwing strikes. We've seen him throw strikes before. It was the pace at which he was throwing. The first minute of the second round, right? He has beaten Barboza up. Barboza goes back to his stool, looks like he's finished, comes back out and looks pretty solid, looks pretty fresh, looks like he's ready to go. Khabib threw 30 strikes on the feet in the first minute of the second round. 30. Yeah. 30 strikes. That is not a pace that you can possibly fight back against as an outstriker. You cannot throw 30 strikes a minute off your back foot against a guy who also has the threat of the takedown. Like, there's no way. It's physically impossible.
Yeah, as an outfighter, like Barboza really, really was hurting for lack of a way to close the distance on his terms. We talked about Holm doing that effectively against Cyborg to mitigate some of that pressure. Barboza needed to be able to do that to Nurmagomedov because as it was, the dynamics of the matchup had him retreating constantly. In fact, his best moments, and he did somehow, because honestly, the one thing I was most confident of in my prediction was that Edson Barboza cannot survive the same kind of pounding that Michael Johnson did on the ground. And somehow he did. He survived 3 of those beating phases of beating on the ground, and still managed to get his licks in portions of rounds 2 and 3, which surprised me with how bad he looked at the end of the first. But his best moments in the second half of the fight were when he was mixing up movement, when he would actually cut back on his movement and plant his feet more. When he was in open space, he wouldn't allow himself to be driven back because responding only with retreat to Khabib's strikes, like that's exactly what he wants. You're going towards the fence. You're occupied with something that is not his takedown attempt, but you know it's coming. But when is it coming? Because he keeps throwing punches, and holy shit, did he just throw 30 of them in the space of 60 seconds? And how do I get away? You have to be able to plant your feet or step in. And Barboza just never felt confident stepping in. And I don't blame him for that. He didn't want to tie up with Khabib, but
I just don't think there's anybody except for maybe Lee who in this division, I don't know. I'm trying to think of who else could be rugged enough. Like maybe Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez is a pretty good defensive wrestler. Like I'm trying to think of who is good enough in that phase to feel comfortable with an underhook or double underhook.
Justin Gaethje? Put Justin Gaethje in the clinch with Khabib. Maybe he can gut it out.
Yeah, Gaethje is actually the fight that I want to see for Khabib, even though I know Gaethje just lost to Eddie Alvarez and like whatever. I think Gaethje is the only guy who is just stupid tough enough to bang it out with Khabib, who's a good enough wrestler. I mean, he was a Division I All-American, kind of improbably, who's nasty enough to not get intimidated or scared and just meet aggression with aggression. Like, because everybody else, like, McGregor is a good, like, let's take Conor McGregor as an example. I think McGregor has a better shot than most in that division, not because he's got the wrestling chops, but because he can actually hurt you when you come in on him the way that Khabib does.
Yeah.
Like, if you run onto McGregor's left hand, he can take your head off. So, and he can find an angle from which to land it where it's going to do the most damage. And he comes out sharp. We know he can do that the first exchange of the fight, right? So, like, I give McGregor as good a chance as anybody because he can make that one shot count more than anybody else. But everybody else, I think, like, I don't think Kevin Lee has the chops to be able to play an outside striking game and then judiciously pick his spots to wrestle.
Right.
At least I haven't seen that from him at this point. I think eventually he would just get dragged into Khabib's game. And kind of get overwhelmed. And
even if he's strong enough and skilled enough to compete in the grappling, which I think he probably is more than almost anyone else in this division.
I think easily more than anybody else. Yeah,
that he can actually maybe hang with Khabib. Can he do it as long as Khabib can do it? Is his stamina going to hold up the way that Khabib's does?
I don't think so.
Probably not, right?
I mean, Poirier is interesting. But Poirier, I think, really more than anybody else needs to be dictating the kind of range and directionality of the fight.
You're not going to like that pressure, even less than Barboza did. It's going to have an effect on him. Yeah, it's just you said I saw you saying on Twitter the night of or maybe the day after the fight that as soon as Khabib started jabbing with Edson, that Edson was done. And
yeah, I think that's when the fight was over.
Yeah, and I can't disagree. Like, Edson had a second chance after surviving the first round. From my perspective, I honestly didn't think he looked that great at the start of the second. In fact, I thought he needed like a good 45 seconds to kind of get his legs back because he was really, really savaged at the end of the first, and more than anything looked mentally broken. Like when in the third round, he had like stuffed 2 takedown attempts against the fence, and then Khabib finally started dragging him back. The look on Barboza's face, he was like, Artax being pulled into the swamp of sadness. He was completely lacking all hope at that point. Like it was just such a mental strain on him that poor bastard.
Did you see this picture that Esther put up on Twitter that was where it's Khabib grinding his head into Barboza's chest against the fence on the ground, like Barboza's kind of seated against the fence, and Barboza just has this 1,000-yard stare on his face.
He's
like
just checked out. He's like he's doing what a torture victim does after an hour straight of torture. We're like, I still feel the pain, but now I'm just in another place. You know, he was astral traveling to avoid fully experiencing the punishment Khabib was putting him through.
I was just like, my God, man. I did not expect it to look like that. I thought Barboza would have a lot more success. And yeah, I mean, to come back to the jab and the kicks too, like the moment that Khabib took away long range from Barboza, when he didn't just let Barboza do his thing there, I was like, okay, this is just a matter of time.
He did it weapon by weapon. He started competing with the kicks. That was what Barboza was hitting him with first. And in the second round, like or even the striking portions of the first, he was firing off kicks. He was putting them up under Barboza's elbows. He was just forcing him to react to that. Then he managed to get a little closer. The Barboza had to plant his feet a little more, and so now Khabib was in jabbing range, and that was Barboza's next layer of offense/defense. And so then Khabib started jabbing with him, and it's not like he was technically superior than Barboza in any of these things. It's just that he kept doing them. And Barboza had to react differently than Khabib did. Like really the dynamic of this fight was that Khabib looked so much more comfortable in Barboza's phase than Barboza did in his. That Edson was just reactive and improvising desperately for most of the fight.
You know what Khabib's striking reminded me of? Kind of next generation Dan Henderson, because Dan Henderson never got enough credit for trying things that he was not like great at or a natural at in ways that made him a much better fighter. Dan Henderson was not a great kicker. He was a powerful kicker, but you know what? Dan Henderson always went out there and threw his goddamn low kicks. Yeah. Dan Henderson was not a great jabber. He did not look like he had a textbook jab. But Dan Henderson, damn it, he went out there and he threw the jab.
Sure did.
Like, and Dan Henderson, by always throwing the jab and throwing those like kind of wonky but crushingly powerful low kicks, like that took away a lot of what opponents could use against him. It took away a lot of ranges. It took away a lot of comfort. It took away a lot of a feeling of safety that his opponents could kind of run to this distance to stay away from him. Khabib is doing that, but combined with his just like headlong forward movement, he never gets frustrated. He never seems to get really tired, or at least more tired than his opponent does. He's like Max Holloway too, in the sense that you can't teach him lessons.
Yeah.
He's like the adjustments that he makes on the fly in combination, like all serving the broader goal of his pressure. I don't know what you do, man. Like I think he's the best lightweight in the world. I think he beats everybody else in that division. And I don't know what the solution is to try and beat him.
You can't teach Khabib lessons because you know what they say, Pat. In Dagestan, lesson teach you.
Lessons
okay,
teach
I'll move on before dwelling.
Ass motherfucker over here.
I want to talk. Oh my God! It was such a toxic pun. It nearly such a toxic joke. It nearly killed my co-host.
You brought my bronchitis back, asshole.
I do want to talk about Khabib's tactics on the floor, though. Every time he fights, we just have to spend a little time, I think, appreciating how good he is at holding people down and beating the shit out of them. I would call this fight, if I had to subtitle it, you know how they called like Manny Pacquiao's win over Oscar De La Hoya death by 1,000 left hands? This was death by leg ride, or death by low leg mount, or Kawajiri mount, as some call it. God damn, is Khabib dangerous in that position. He would repeatedly triangle his legs around Barboza's knees, like just above his knees or right on them, just so that Barboza would have to work extremely hard to free at least one leg to even have any hope of getting up to his feet. And that is really all that Khabib wants, right? He can go like with a positional advantage, he's happy to make you work strength against strength, even if you're slowly making progress, because by the time you finally almost get out, he's just going to transition to his next position of control. So like once you get your legs out, then you belly down, then he reaches around your back and controls your wrist.
It's not just that he's always a step ahead of you and knows what your escape routes are. It's that he's hitting you the whole time and forcing you to burn energy the whole time too. So if he were like Demian Maia is always a step or two ahead of you, right? But Demian Maia is not wearing on you the way that Khabib does,
right,
where he is constantly forcing you to eat damage, these tremendously powerful ground strikes. Like how Khabib basically throws ground strikes as if he were the prototype from reading Fedor Emelianenko's book on ground and pound, you know?
Yeah, like, he's got great shoulder rotation. The way he turns his elbow over, you know, like it makes it like a short overhand hook that it just cracks. Like even when he's got no body in it, when his legs are triangled and he has no way to drive off the ground, he still lands power with that left hand.
There is a technique to landing ground strikes. And I think finally, after years, it's making a comeback. Like there were guys in the early days who were really good at it. Guys like Fedor. Mark Coleman was really good at torquing his body into his ground strikes. It was an art that was taught.
Tito Ortiz.
Tito Ortiz. And then I think from maybe 2009, 2010 or so until about 2014, it was kind of a lost art. It like guys, I think because that's when we were in the scramble phase of MMA grappling. Like it was all about transitions. There wasn't as much emphasis on teaching it and using it. Oh, Uriah Faber too, old school ground and pound guy
for sure.
And so I think it was kind of a lost art for a few years, and now we're starting to see it make a comeback. And there is a technique to it. There are ways of learning to torque your body into your shots. It's about finding the right distance above your opponent and finding the right posture from which to throw, having a secure base underneath you, and then really torquing. There's a great video of Fedor teaching ground and pound to Jacare, actually. And you can see the way that the mitts move on your back when Fedor was landing the shots. You can see the way that Fedor advocates like torquing your body into the shots. It's all in Fedor's book too, which is one of the few MMA books that's actually worth reading.
Yep, I can co-sign that.
Guys, it's actually worth reading. But Khabib is basically the prototype for this is excellent ground striking technique.
Yeah, and I've never seen somebody be so confident in their control that they like there was a period in the third round, the last big salvo I think that Khabib landed, where Barboza was turned away and he had just hips sort of parallel to the fence. And Khabib had one leg still kind of laced up, you know, like a position that like Mirsad Bektic ends up in frequently, where he's just sort of riding one leg, but Barboza is mostly on his feet, just struggling to get free.
Alex Volkanovski likes that position too.
Yeah. And you know, so does like, anyway. He had one leg between his legs, and Barboza he was so focused on getting that leg free that Khabib was free to just blast him with left hands. And I have not seen ground and pound where there seems to be so little. It's like the threat of Khabib's grappling is its own extra layer of control, where people just give him openings for strikes because they know they cannot just allow themselves to be out-wrestled. Because if you don't struggle against it, he's just going to find a way to hold you down and beat your ass anyway.
So I think that there's maybe a broader point that we're dancing around here that explains some of this. And that I think is that on the feet, you know, we talk about like flow state, right? Or like how you just kind of get into the zone and you're reacting to things. You're not consciously thinking about them.
Yeah.
I think when you have somebody on top of you in MMA, it is very hard to get into that state where you're just doing things and you're not thinking about them.
Yeah.
On some level, you know, grappling is complicated. It's hard, even for lifelong grapplers, really, really good kinds of practitioners of grappling. You still sometimes need to stop and think about what you do next. And Khabib exploits that. You know, I think it's very hard when you're in MMA with a very good grappler on top of you to just let yourself do the things that you know you're capable of doing without pausing. And it's those pauses where Khabib feasts.
Absolutely.
That's where he makes his hay, when he knows that you're thinking and he can just do things. Because if you're thinking, he can both think and hit you at the same time. You know, Like, he can be planning out where he thinks you're going to go next, where you say you've got 3 options, which of those you're most likely to choose. And then he can hit you while thinking about how he responds to your next move. Like, it's not a thing for him to free an arm and throw 3 hard uppercuts as you're trying to scramble against the fence while thinking about what you're going to do next, because he knows what your options are. You know, like, he doesn't have to think. If he's in control, he doesn't have to be the one thinking that through.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's extra mental pressure as well, because you if you're stopping to think, like, you need that time to think. You need that as a moment of repose to consider what you're going to do. And every single time you tell yourself subconsciously as a fighter, like, now is when I can plan my next move, or now is when I have to plan my next move. That moment gets taken away from you by the fact that he just starts hitting you in the face. Like, you never get to stop. The moment Khabib hits his first takedown, you never get to stop reacting. You never get the initiative back. No matter how well you do, how many counters you get in, you are always fighting on his terms after that first takedown is completed.
That's kind of why I want to see Gaethje fight him. Right. Is because Gaethje is so good at never thinking.
Who doesn't give a shit?
Yeah, like, I don't, like, that's not, that sounds like an insult when we say it that way, but that's just not, Gaethje is not a guy who's going to spend a lot of time planning shit. So let's say Khabib backs Gaethje up to the fence and gets him to the ground. Gaethje doesn't stop. He never stops.
Yeah.
In the middle of a fight to plan out his next move. He just does things.
Yep.
And so I think, kind of paradoxically, that makes him a tough fight for Khabib, because you can't teach Gaethje lessons in the same way that you teach other fighters lessons. And Khabib's game is kind of a snowball rolling downhill of demoralization. You can't really demoralize Gaethje. We saw from Alvarez that you can stop him. There are ways, if you fight disciplined against him, to outland him over the course of the fight. And maybe one of those does enough for a referee to step in and call it. But you cannot, like, teach him that there are things that are that it's best not to do.
Yeah, what does that mean, even? To Justin Gaethje, best not to... You mean don't backflip off the cage after having 50% of the neurons smashed out of your brain every single time? You mean don't, like, have the best round of the fight just before getting knocked out by Eddie Alvarez, even though you are even more tired than he is? Yeah, he doesn't learn. So you can't teach him.
That's kind of like,
you might be right.
That's another reason, but that's also, I think when you're trying to pick opponents to fight Khabib, like, I don't think thinking in terms of skill sets is actually the way to pick who's going to do best against him. I think it's really and truly a mindset thing.
Maybe you're right.
And that's also why I think McGregor, at least initially, for a minute or two, would be really dangerous. You can teach McGregor lessons, but you have to break his confidence first. And the hard part with McGregor is finding a way to break it.
And as he showed against Aldo, man, the poise and that hair trigger, they are very, very dangerous early. Yeah, there's Khabib is such an interesting challenge for any elite fighter, even near his weight, because just because of the unique mental impact he seems to have on people who fight him.
Yeah, that makes Tony Ferguson interesting too, because Ferguson is just such a wild man.
Yeah,
but I think the skill set thing really comes into play. Like, Ferguson would be dangerous late into that fight, but Ferguson likes to scramble so much that he's just going to you cannot out scramble Khabib.
Yeah.
If you get into those exchanges with him repeatedly, like, he's just going to beat you up. We saw that, like, and Khabib isn't going to get triangled the way that Kevin Lee did either, you know?
No, I would be very surprised if he did. I've never even seen Khabib allow an opponent in MMA to set up in an offensive grappling position.
Right.
They don't even get the chance. Like, he's on your back, you try to roll over, he passes, he stands over you and beats you until you roll over again, then he changes angle and takes you down the other way. Like, if you try to go into a position for submission, that's just free reign for him to just blast you on the chin over and over and over with postured up strikes. So Khabib Nurmagomedov looked fucking brilliant. He looked phenomenal. Edson Barboza did all he could to stop that. Like I said, he still continued to have his moments, but not even close to a big enough moment to turn the tide once Khabib got that first shot completed. All All right, let's take one more break then. We're done with that fight, and when we come back, we still have a little bit of the main card to discuss, namely the fights between Cynthia Calvillo and Carla Esparza, and the one between Carlos Condit and Neil Magny, and then we're going to talk about Flyweight, future contender, if things pan out the way I'm starting to expect them to, Matthews Nicolau, who had a really strong performance over Louis Smolka on the undercard after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let us talk about Carlos Condit's long-awaited return against Neil Magny in the main card opener at UFC 219. Condit afraid to pull the trigger. Not afraid, but incapable of pulling the trigger. That was our fear. Did it look that way to you, Pat?
It didn't look to me like he was afraid or unable to pull the trigger so much as he was trying to try something different out in the first round of that fight. It looked like he wanted to be kind of the veteran counter striker. And so he was kind of waiting on Magny, waiting for him to go, and then he was trying to respond. I'm not sure that suits Condit. I'm not sure.
I don't think somebody whose main form of evading punches is to do the extremely risky Muhammad Ali style head movement is really cut out for counter punching. Like to lean back and throw your chin up in the air, just waiting for that Magny right hand. That happened over and over and over again. I don't think that's really Condit's speed. After that, did he look a little reticent to you? I mean, honestly, to me, there was maybe a bit of that. Like I still just have this inescapable feeling that if we were to rewind Carlos Condit 3 years and leave Neil Magny where he is right now, that Condit would probably still win that fight. A younger Condit probably would. But honestly, it looked kind of like the game had passed Condit by, at least in this matchup. More than that, he was incapable of fighting the way he wanted to. Like I just don't think he had the right answers for the game that Magny brought to the table.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the sadder piece of this, is that I don't think Condit really looked diminished. I think he maybe took a little time to really get going. But like, so much as the fact that Magny always would have been a tough matchup for him if Condit couldn't like pour it on and really overwhelm him with strikes like in the third round. Yeah. You know? Like Magny's takedown game on the ground, his ability to control, his length and output on the feet. That's kind of the sad thing for me, is like, what if Carlos Condit is not so much old as he has been stylistically supplanted by a guy that we thought was previously kind of a mid-range fighter,
right?
Fringe top 15 talent.
He didn't look old so much as he looked like an old model, that he was just a little, outdated. I think we have to give some credit to that for Neil Magny. In fact, a considerable portion, he did a very good job of, as his corner repeatedly told him to keep his ranges. He was as much as he could, especially after. There were still moments in the third when he was getting put up against the fence, but he did a good job, I think, throughout of keeping Condit either on the end of his reach or pulling him into the clinch and making him fight a wrestling battle. He didn't spend much time, except when Condit was coming after him with long combinations, just sort of sitting around in the pocket. And it made it really, really hard for Condit to score. He just doesn't really have like the footwork or the subtlety of technique to like jab with a fighter like Magny at range. And it kind of made me realize, who have we ever seen Condit against whose frame is so similar to his own, who has a similar height and reach? In fact, I think Magny must have longer arms, but it really seemed to give him problems. And I don't know if I can recall seeing Condit, other than like, I don't know, Martin Kampmann's kind of similar in build. I've never really seen him have to fight somebody in like a range striking battle like that. And he didn't really seem to have the answers for it.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, all credit to Magny, who has, every time Neil Magny fights, he looks better, you know? except with the exception of that fight with Rafael dos Anjos, where he got bumped off his feet and then beat up and then submitted. Or I guess the Maia fight. So I guess there's a formula for beating Neil Magny, which is to out wrestle him and beat him up from top position.
Sure.
But
B. Lorenz Larkin.
Yeah, just kick his legs so hard that they fall off.
Yeah. Which RDA did both parts of that game plan, which makes him even more impressive. Magny, he looked pretty good. Condit looked all right. He just didn't quite seem to know what he needed to do to win. And I don't know. Is that sadder than him not being able to pull the trigger? I don't know. It makes you feel a little better than me seeing Condit. I didn't see Carlos passing up many openings. Maybe his timing wasn't quite there, but he was also not getting the fight he wanted from the outset. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel a little better that Condit didn't just get, he didn't get worked over completely. He was in there. Yeah. It just didn't look like a matchup that suited him. So, what can you do, Pat? What can you do?
I don't know. I mean, credit to Magny, who's never going to beat himself. I don't think. You can beat Magny, but Magny isn't going to go out and beat himself. And I think in a matchup like this, Condit would have needed Magny to make a bunch of mistakes, and Magny just kind of didn't. It wasn't like Magny fought this scintillating and brilliantly exciting kind of game plan. But he just did things that he did well and didn't fuck up. And it turns out at this point, it's kind of sad, but maybe the age has passed Carlos Condit by a little bit. Yeah.
And maybe, he was never a fighter that would have done so well against that 1-1-2 because he just didn't. Yeah. I don't know. It didn't look like a style that made sense to him, something he's not experienced before. But that's about all we can say on that fight, I think. And with that, I would like to talk about Carla Esparza's win over Cynthia Calvillo. Didn't see that one coming. I did not expect Carla Esparza to win so handily on the feet. I don't think she dominated Cynthia Calvillo.
Did she win handily on the feet?
Well, I don't mean to say that. I expected her to be at a loss as the fight went on if she was not able to make her wrestling work. I was really convinced before this fight that the investment that Esparza has clearly been making into improving her striking, into becoming more comfortable in the pocket and putting her combinations together, that would turn out to be a mistake against Calvillo because she would be left only with her less natural phase, meanwhile giving Calvillo the advantage on the ground. And instead, it was Carla Esparza sort of plugging away on the feet and using her wrestling largely defensively to stop Calvillo from taking it to the ground. And as it turns out, I thought the answer in this fight, the difference between this striking matchup for Calvillo and the Calderwood one, while both were close, is that Esparza really treated the striking exchanges like a wrestler. She's kind of a grinder no matter what she does, and she's definitely not a take one to give one fighter, but like many wrestlers, she is a if I take one, I will give one kind of fighter. And I think that got to Calvillo as the fight went on, that Esparza was just not willing to give Calvillo any extended portion of the fight, that she was constantly trying to compete with her.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually scored the fight for Calvillo, and on rewatch, I scored the fight for Calvillo again. I think Calvillo edged it out. I'm not mad that the decision went for Esparza. I see why it did, and that's fine. But what's worrisome for Calvillo is that she kept doing the same things over and over and over again. Every time Esparza came in, she hit her with a right hand. And I think she hit Esparza with better shots than Esparza hit her with, especially through the first two rounds. I think she did the right thing, but she only did one thing. She kept throwing a right hand. And eventually Esparza kind of figured it out and realized that if she just kept going through the right hand, there would be things available after that. Calvillo relied on that to scare Esparza off. And Esparza, because she's a talented and skilled veteran with a ton of fights under her belt, you can't throw the same punch at Esparza over and over again and expect her to never adjust to it. So it was a pretty standard kind of prospect loss where the more experienced fighter figured out the limited, if effective, tools at the prospect's disposal and kind of powered through it.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't, I actually did not score this fight very carefully, but just on vague recollection, I don't have much of an issue with it going narrowly to Calvillo. It was a close fight. It was pretty close. I think a lot of people were I don't know. This seems to happen, especially with every female fighter, right? That quickly they develop like an anti-fan base. And so there were people like, oh, well, I don't like Calvillo, and look at the way she reacted. She was so excited she thought she won, and then she didn't. What an idiot. And I'm like, well, you know, maybe I wouldn't have been confident I'd won if I was in her position, but she had a case, I thought. It was close. But she definitely gave the impression of having run out of ideas a little bit in the later rounds. And to your point, Joe Rogan said something that rang true to me as I was watching. He said in the third, like just kind of out of nowhere, he was like, is it just me or are these exchanges not very creative? Like, they're entering with the same things over and over and over again. And he was right. And I think that Esparza just proved to be a little more comfortable in that kind of situation than Calvillo was. Because Calvillo was like running out of ideas. Esparza was just kind of sticking to like the 3 or 4 ideas she had and was just cycling through them, and they kept working. It was really an, if I have to take one, I will give one in return mentality, where she just kept plugging away. I didn't think that it wasn't like a runaway win for her, but I do respect the grit that she brought to it, and I thought it turned out to be the right move against a still very inexperienced fighter in Cynthia Calvillo, because she didn't really know how to take control of the fight after that. She did not know how to put her stamp on anything once Esparza realized that she could kind of just keep going at the same rate and keep landing. Prospect loss, right? What do you think?
I mean, either Calvillo learns or she doesn't. One of the two.
Yeah. Matthews Nicolau, then. We'll move on and quickly talk about Matthews Nicolau, who fought on the undercard here. He took on Louis Smolka, and I thought he looked phenomenal. I really thought he looked great, and has quickly established himself now following that win over John Moraga. Close and not particularly exciting, but a win nonetheless. He's starting to look like a serious flyweight prospect, like somebody who is quickly developing into a future contender. What did you make of his performance?
I think that he would have been in this position earlier if he hadn't gotten USADA'd.
Oh, almost certainly.
Like this dude is super talented. He is young. They kept talking about, oh, he's 24, but he's been fighting as a pro since he was like 16 or 17. So this dude's in his prime. He's ready for the steps up. You don't need to take it slow with him. You can slot him right in against elite competition and expect him to do well. And I mean, which is to be expected. He's already got wins over John Moraga and Louis Smolka. He's beaten the gatekeepers. You can put him in there with the elite of the division and fast track him to a title shot. And I think he's an interesting fighter. He's a good defensive wrestler. He's a good offensive wrestler. He's a good grappler. He's got really quick and powerful hands. Like, he's an intriguing dude. The USADA thing is pretty clear. It was for an estrogen blocker. Like, you're not taking an estrogen blocker if you're not taking steroids. Like, so you can take that as you will. If you want to hold that against him, you're more than welcome to do so, and I think that's perfectly fair. But talent-wise and skill-wise, he's there for it.
Yeah, the skills were what were evident in this fight. It was that, I mean, Louis Smolka, I thought Louis Smolka would manage to pressure him and would put a pace on him that would give Nicolau a little more trouble than it actually did. Smolka did make some nice adjustments after getting just destroyed in the first round. The first round of this fight was akin to McGregor versus Alvarez in how dominant Nicolau was with his counters, and Smolka just could not figure out not to keep walking into them and couldn't see them coming. So it was just right hand, left hook over and over and over again. Very Chad Mendez kind of counterpunching. But after that, Smolka, he started throwing a short right inside the left hook. He started to keep that right hand up high and come back with his own hook. He started to work his kicks more. He started to bounce in and out of range a little more and not just walk into the pocket over and over and over and allow himself to be timed. And that is what really impressed me, is that Nicolau managed to adjust to a veteran's adjustments. That Smolka, against somebody who was maybe not cut out right now to be put into contention, would have had more success after making that change, that his durability and his determination would have made the difference, and he would have managed to put enough pressure on a fighter like Nicolau to slow him down. Except that for Nicolau in particular, when he did slow down, he changed things up. He started hitting counter takedowns as Smolka came in, just kind of rinse and repeat shots, just to break that pressure and to buy himself a little time to rest. and just stayed on his game. It was the opposite of what Calvillo showed against Esparza, that Nicolau most certainly did not run out of ideas. He knew absolutely what he needed to do, and I can't even fault him for getting as tired as he did, because I thought he was very close to finishing Smolka at many points of that first round, and I can't fault him for throwing heat trying to get him out of there, because I thought Smolka was done. I thought he was just 1 foot from the grave. So yeah, I was extremely impressed with Matthews Nicolau. Is there anybody in particular you would like to see him slotted against if we're moving him into contention quickly?
A fight I would like is I would like to see him against Alexandre Pantoja.
Ooh, I like that.
But I don't have it's flyweight. I don't have a strong, like, off the top of my head sense for what the rankings are.
Nobody really stands out as like, ooh, gotta see this fight. Speaking of flyweights, Kyoji Horiguchi had a phenomenal weekend. We didn't talk about Ryzen at all, but the Ryzen event, the portions of it that I managed to see, I'm not exactly capable of staying up till 6 a.m. to watch those, but was a lot of fun, very pride-like. And Kyoji Horiguchi, 3 finishes in 2 days to be the Ryzen Bantamweight Grand Prix winner. Really smart move letting him go from the UFC. I got to commend them once again for that decision, because he's definitely not like the second best flyweight on the planet. So way to go, UFC. But I think that's about it for us. And we're kicking the new year off right with a nice breakdown of a lot of momentous changes in these divisions. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Cris, Cyborg, both dominant fighters reasserting themselves once again. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty fun event, in fact. And I enjoyed ringing in the new year with all of you, and especially you, Pat. But
oh, well, thanks, Connor.
Before we go, sweetie, I want to hear what you have coming out this week.
I have a new episode of Tides of History, an interview with the University of Oklahoma historian Kyle Harper about how climate change and plague played into the end of the Roman Empire. It got way colder, and there were waves of disease. And Harper just wrote a really excellent book called The Fate of Rome on those things, so I quizzed him on it. It's a topic I've spent a lot of time on over the years, so it was nice to be able to talk to a fellow expert on those things and kind of dig in deep.
Nice.
Because I thought his book was really good, but I didn't 100% agree with everything. So it's nice to have a little kind of a little critical back and forth.
Awesome. Yeah.
And what else am I doing? I don't know if I'm doing anything else. I think that may be it. I may have a couple of posts up on Deadspin, history posts, but nothing MMA related for a while.
As for me, I have in the works right now. I'm writing something about matchmaking, and sort of related to the discussion that we had on this show a little while ago. But keep your eyes out for that. I'm hoping to put it out this week. Want to look at basically matchmaking without momentum, matchmaking in 2017 in the UFC, and how the current landscape of the sport has sort of changed the way that fighters are moved into contention and towards meaningful title shots, and given meaningful runs and allowed to generate fan bases. Because as Conor McGregor is once again reminding us, that's not really the case for most fighters in the UFC these days. Most fighters not named McGregor, that is. Okay, so keep your eyes out for that. And is there anything else? Has it only taken one holiday break for me to forget how the show works? No, I think that's about it. Find us on social media if you have any questions, concerns, or comments. You can find us both. Oh, what the hell was that, Pat?
That was a little pop-up there. Sorry.
Pat's over here looking at one of Ted Cruz's favorite websites during the final portion of the show.
I am, yeah. You know me. Yeah, but we're going to have a bonus this week.
Yes, we are. Thank you. That's what I was struggling to remember. We're going to do the handies. We are each going to give handies, Pat, to a number of fighters. Boy, do you want to save me here? Do you want to...
No, I was just going to let you roll with it and see how you handled the handy issue.
We're going to give our year-end awards. So that's going to be a bonus episode coming out this week. We are looking to record it later this week. We'll put it out as soon as possible when that's done. So if you want to know what our thoughts for best fight, best fighter, best knockout, whatever categories we happen to come up with, and maybe we'll have a few fun and whimsical ones as well, then check that out. And that will be available for $3 subscribers to the Heavy Hands Patreon. So make sure you get over there if you want to get in on our year-end awards, if you want to get in on those precious handies And find us on social media. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. I am at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. Find us both on Facebook.com/either Patrick Wyman MMA or Connor Ruebusch MMA. Check out Pat's work on Deadspin. Check out the Tides of History podcast and go back and listen to Fall of Rome if you haven't done it already. And we will catch you guys next time. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.